So another question that I get as an ex-Trump supporter, ex-conservative, is Danny, what made you change? And I wish I could say that there was this burning bush moment or this aha moment, but in reality, it was a culmination of things, seeds that were planted, and then finally it just clicked. I would need to write a whole book to explain my life's journey, but for the sake of time in this video, I'll do a quick synopsis. So I went from college to professional baseball to 10 years in the Florida Department of Corrections. And while in prison, I met a man by the name of Rashawn Clark. Rashawn was 16 when he was sentenced to prison for 20 years. I, on the other hand, had been to prison, home, back to prison for a total of 14 felonies and a total sentence of 10 years. Now, Rashawn was a black Muslim and I was a white Christian conservative. And this was at the height of the Black Lives Matters movement and when Trump was campaigning for president. And in typical conservative fashion, I would run around telling all the black guys in prison that Trump would be the best thing for them, that Trump is the best thing for the black community. And I would be met with resistance. Trump doesn't care about us. Trump does not care about the black community. He's a self-serving billionaire who cares about no one but himself. And I would tell Rashawn that we can't blame anybody but ourselves for why we are in prison. These are the consequences to our actions. Stop being the victim and accept accountability for our choices. And what Rashawn said next was probably the first seed that was planted that ultimately started me on this journey. He said, when you got sentenced to prison, the judge looked at you as the all-American boy who just lost his way, needed some mental health and substance abuse help, but they seen you as being redeemable. He said, I, on the other hand, at the age of 16, was sentenced to 20 years. They looked at me as a thug, a savage, a predator, and my life was not worthy of redemption. In spite of the Department of Justice, Juvenile Justice, recommending that he get a program, they sentenced him to 20 years in prison instead as a juvenile. And Rashawn would always say to me, DC, you underestimate me. And he was right. Because in my arrogance, I looked at myself as the smartest person in the room. I'm in prison, I'm college educated. Most of these people in here don't even have a GED. So Rashawn recommended that I read Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness. And after I read it, a light bulb went off, my life was forever changed, and that's what started me on this movement. And this is what I learned, and I saw it with my own two eyes. So in the United States of America, the 13th Amendment said the abolishment of slavery except when punishment for a crime. Before this time period, the only people that went to prison were white vagabonds, outcasts, poor white people. But slave labor was such an integral part of the Southern economy that without it, the economy would collapse. So they needed new slave labor. That's why they started the mass incarceration prison boom. Fast forward 100 years, you had Jim Crow segregation, where black people were relegated to second-class citizenship. They were still seen as subhuman. Black Americans faced disenfranchisement from voting. They had to pay a poll tax. They had to pass literacy exams, but nobody wanted to educate them. And they were robbed of their generational wealth. Black Americans also faced barriers to education, to employment, and to housing. They could literally be discriminated against based on their skin color, based on their race. Then we passed the 1964 Civil Rights Act, 1965 Voting Rights Act, which says we can no longer discriminate based on skin color or based on race. So in 2024, what's the only group of people that we can still legally discriminate against? That we can deny housing, that we can deny jobs, that we can deny access to education? If you answered correctly, it's convicted felons. Now, do you think it's a coincidence that 1 in 3 black males carry a convicted felon label? 1 in 6 Latino males and 1 in 17 white males. So either I think it's a coincidence or I think black people are inherently evil with the proclivity to commit crime. And I couldn't go for that. So I did more research and I found out that Nixon and Reagan created the war on drugs. I see that we created the school to prison pipeline. We defunded education while militarizing the police, which patrols predominantly the black community. Then we coined terms like super predator and black on black crime. And once again, right here in the United States of America, we were spinning a narrative that made black Americans seem subhuman. And in my humble opinion, our criminal justice system is the epicenter of systemic racism in the US. It's because it's where we can just label somebody a criminal and justify our inhumanity towards that person. And as Rashawn said, there's a two-tiered justice system in America, and we're seeing it now more than ever. One for wealthy white billionaires like Trump, who can walk the streets with 34 felony convictions while being liable for an essay of E. Jean Carroll. And then there's one for people like Rashawn, who spent 20 years of his life behind that fence. But it's impossible to get to this level of understanding without actually putting in the work. And this is why I encourage so many white Americans to actually just do the work. This country is not going backwards. We are not going back. It's only forward from here.